The wind howled across the desolate plains as Sarah collapsed against the weathered fence post, her hands trembling as she clutched the wound in her side. Blood seeped through her fingers, dark and warm against the freezing November air. She had been running for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes since she'd escaped from the men who had taken her from the roadside 3 days ago. Her car had broken down on the lonely stretch of highway between Phoenix and Albuquerque. She'd been so stupid, so careless. When the truck pulled up behind her, she'd actually felt relief. 2 men had gotten out, offering help with easy smiles that never reached their eyes. By the time she realized something was wrong, it was too late. Now, as darkness crept across the vast expanse of rangeland, Sarah knew she was dying. The bullet had gone clean through, but she was losing too much blood. Her vision blurred at the edges, and every breath felt like knives in her chest. She'd made it this far by pure adrenaline, but her body was giving up. That's when she heard the sound of hooves against hard earth. Sarah tried to move, to hide, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. She slumped further against the post, resignation washing over her. If it was them, at least it would be over. She was so tired of running, tired of hurting, tired of the fear that had consumed her for 3 endless days. The rider emerged from the twilight like something out of an old Western film. He sat tall in the saddle, a silhouette against the dying sun, his hat pulled low over his face. As he drew closer, Sarah could make out more details. The silver stubble on his jaw, the deep lines around his eyes, the rifle secured to his saddle. He dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. His eyes took in the scene, her torn clothing, the blood, the terror etched into her face. She watched as his jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the weathered skin. "Please," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. She didn't even know what she was asking for anymore. "Just make it quick." The rancher stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah saw something flicker in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. He'd seen violence before. He knew what it looked like, what it did to people. He knelt beside her, and Sarah flinched, expecting pain. Instead, she felt gentle hands assessing her wound, checking her pulse. His touch was surprisingly careful for someone with such rough, calloused fingers. "Name's John Westfield," he said quietly, his voice gravelly but steady. "This is my land. And I'm going to tell you something right now. You're not dying today." Sarah wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but all that came out was a weak sob. "You don't understand. They're coming. They'll find me. They'll kill us both." John's expression didn't change. He pulled off his jacket and pressed it firmly against her wound, making her gasp. "How many?" "3. Maybe 4. I don't know. There was another man at the place they kept me." "The old Morrison property," John said, more to himself than to her. "Abandoned for 5 years now. Should have known someone would use it for trouble." He helped her stand, and the world spun sickeningly. Before she could fall, he lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing, carrying her to his horse. The animal, a sturdy chestnut mare, stood perfectly still as he maneuvered Sarah into the saddle and climbed up behind her. "My house is 2 miles north," he said, wrapping one strong arm around her waist to keep her upright. "There's a storm cellar with a steel door. You'll be safe there while I deal with this." "No," Sarah managed, fighting through the fog in her mind. "You don't know what they're like. They're not just. They're organized. Professional. This isn't their first time." John urged the horse into a steady canter, and Sarah felt his chest solid and warm against her back. "Neither is this mine." The ride to his ranch house seemed to take both seconds and hours. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of the horse's rhythmic gait, the iron strength of the arm holding her, the vast emptiness of the landscape around them. When they finally arrived, full darkness had fallen, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the clear desert sky. John's house was modest, a single-story structure of adobe and wood, with a covered porch and a barn set back about 50 yards. He carried her inside, laying her on a worn leather couch, and immediately went to work. From a cabinet, he pulled out a proper first aid kit, not the cheap kind from a drugstore, but the serious supplies of someone who lived far from hospitals and knew how to handle emergencies. I was a combat medic, he explained as he cut away her shirt to better access the wound. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. I've seen worse than this, and those boys survived. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, cleaning the wound, packing it, wrapping it tightly. Sarah bit down on the leather belt he'd given her, tears streaming down her face as he worked. But through the pain, she felt something she hadn't felt in days. Hope. When he finished, he gave her water and 2 pills. Antibiotics, he explained. And something for the pain. You need to stay awake for a bit longer. Make sure you're stable. Why are you helping me? Sarah asked, her voice stronger now. You could just call the police. Let them handle it. John stood, walking to the window and peering out into the darkness. Nearest sheriff station is 40 minutes away. By the time they got here, those men would have found you. And I don't let bad things happen on my land if I can help it. As if summoning them with his words, headlights appeared in the distance, bouncing along the rough road that led to his property. John's expression didn't change, but Sarah felt her heart begin to race. The cellar, she started, trying to sit up. Too late, John said calmly. They've seen the lights in the house. If you disappear now, they'll tear this place apart looking for you. He turned to face her, and Sarah saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not fear, but cold, calculated determination. Can you shoot? Sarah nodded. Her father had taken her to the range every weekend for years. Yes. John went to a cabinet and pulled out a handgun, checking the magazine before handing it to her. That's a Glock 19. 15 rounds. Safety's off. You point, you shoot. Understand? What are you going to do? The unthinkable, he said simply, and then he was moving, grabbing his rifle, dimming the lights, positioning himself by the door. The truck pulled into his yard, and Sarah heard doors slamming, voices calling out. They weren't even trying to be subtle. Why would they? They were hunting an injured woman in the middle of nowhere. They thought they had all the power. John Westfield. The voice that called out was smooth, educated, completely at odds with the violence Sarah knew it concealed. We're looking for a woman. Dangerous fugitive. She might have come onto your property. We're federal agents. John opened the door, standing in the doorway with his rifle held casually but ready. That's so. Let's see some identification. 3 men stood in his yard, illuminated by the porch light. Sarah could see them through the window, the 2 who had taken her from the roadside, and a third she didn't recognize. They wore tactical gear but no obvious badges or insignia. We don't have time for this, one of them said, his hand moving toward his weapon. Step aside, old man. What happened next took less than 10 seconds. John's rifle came up smooth and fast, and his first shot took out the porch light, plunging everything into darkness. Sarah heard shouts, more gunfire, the sound of men diving for cover. She stayed low on the couch, the Glock gripped tight in both hands, her heart hammering. The gunfight was brief and brutal. John moved through his own property like a ghost, using every shadow, every piece of cover. He'd spent years learning this land, and he used that knowledge ruthlessly. Sarah heard one man cry out, then another. Return fire shattered a window, and she pressed herself flatter against the floor. Then silence. Long, terrible silence. Sarah was about to call out when the door opened and John stepped inside, breathing hard but steady. Stay down, he said, and then he was at the window again, watching. Are they? 2 down, 1 run. He won't get far on foot in this desert at night, but we need to call the sheriff now. As John made the call, explaining the situation in short, efficient sentences, Sarah felt the adrenaline begin to drain away, leaving her shaking and weak. When he hung up, she finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. Why? Why risk your life for a stranger? John was quiet for a moment, staring out at the darkness. 23 years ago, my daughter went missing. She was driving home from college. Car broke down on a lonely road. His voice was flat, emotionless, but Sarah heard the ocean of grief beneath it. They found her body 3 weeks later. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. I'm so sorry. I couldn't save her, John continued. But I'll be damned if I let it happen to someone else.
Not on my watch. Not on my land.
He turned to look at her, and his eyes were wet but clear. Those men out there, they're not the first to use these empty places for their evil. But every time I can stop one, I do it. For Emma. And for every daughter, every sister, every person who just needs someone to stand between them and the monsters. The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later with 3 deputies. The man who had run was found 2 miles away, collapsed to his knees in exhaustion. The 2 in John's yard were both dead. A search of their truck revealed evidence of multiple kidnappings, a network that had been operating for years across the Southwest. Sarah spent 2 days in the hospital, recovering from blood loss and dehydration. John visited once, bringing flowers and standing awkwardly at the foot of her bed until she thanked him for saving her life. Just did what needed doing, he said, uncomfortable with her gratitude. She never forgot him, the rancher who had looked at her broken, bleeding request for mercy and done the unthinkable. He hadn't given her a quick death. He'd given her life.